Right now, as you're watching this, something absolutely unprecedented is unfolding on the world stage. And I genuinely believe most Americans have no idea just how serious this is. Late Thursday night, while most of the country was sleeping, the Trump administration made a move that stunned 6 out of 7 G7 nations, sent shockwaves through NATO, and handed Vladimir Putin what might be one of his biggest financial windfalls since the war in Ukraine began over 4 years ago. And then, standing on a frozen military base above the Arctic Circle in Norway, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney fired back with a response so direct, so blunt, so defiant that it left Washington scrambling. This is not speculation. This is not opinion. This is verified, confirmed breaking news reported by the Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg, CBC, Euronews, Al Jazeera, Time Magazine, and the Washington Post. And if you care about where your tax dollars go, if you care about American credibility on the world stage, if you care about whether Russia profits from a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people, then you need to hear every single word of what I'm about to tell you. So please, before we go any further, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell notification, because stories like this are exactly why this channel exists. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand something that the mainstream media is barely scratching the surface of. Let me set the stage for you. Right now, the world is in the middle of multiple overlapping crises. The United States and Israel launched military operations against Iran on February 28th, 2026. That conflict has escalated rapidly, and one of its most devastating side effects has been the near total disruption of oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical energy choke points on the entire planet. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through that narrow waterway, and when it gets blocked, prices don't just go up a little, they explode. Brent crude has surged past $100 a barrel. Gas prices at the pump here in America have been climbing week after week, and the economic pressure has been enormous. So late Thursday night, March 13th, 2026, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent posted on X, formerly Twitter, that the United States was issuing a 30-day waiver on sanctions against Russian oil that was already loaded onto tankers at sea. Let me say that again so it sinks in. The United States government, which has spent years building an international coalition to punish Russia for invading Ukraine, just told the world that for the next 30 days, anyone can buy Russian oil sitting on tankers without fear of American sanctions. Bessent called it a temporary measure to stabilize global energy markets. He insisted it would not provide significant financial benefit to the Russian government. But here's what actually happened in reality. There are an estimated 128 million barrels of Russian oil floating on tankers around the world right now, much of it on what intelligence agencies call the shadow fleet, a network of aging, poorly maintained vessels with obscure ownership, fake insurance, and radar jamming equipment, all designed to evade Western sanctions. These ships are run by shadowy networks with ties to both Russia and, critically, Iran. And now the United States just gave them a green light to sell all of it openly on the global market. Now, here's where this story gets truly explosive. Just 2 days before this announcement, the G7 nations, that's the United States, Canada, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Japan, held a virtual summit. And according to German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who spoke publicly about it the very next day, 6 out of those 7 leaders made it absolutely clear that easing sanctions on Russia was the wrong move. 6 out of 7. The only country that disagreed, the only country that went ahead and did it anyway, was the United States. Think about that for a moment. America built this sanctions regime. America rallied the world to impose these economic penalties on Russia. America told its allies that maintaining pressure on Putin was essential to ending the war in Ukraine. And then, in the middle of the night, without consulting those allies, without getting their agreement, the Trump administration unilaterally pulled the rug out. Chancellor Merz did not mince words. Speaking at a press conference at the Bardufoss military base in northern Norway, Merz said he was, and I quote this carefully to be accurate, a little bit surprised when he woke up Friday morning to discover what Washington had done overnight. He went on to say that 6 of 7 G7 members clearly opposed easing sanctions and that Russia should not benefit from the situation. He called the decision wrong, and his voice was not the only one. This is where Mark Carney enters the picture. And folks, this is the part of the story that has Washington absolutely buzzing. Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister and former head of both the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, was in Norway for a reason. He, along with Chancellor Merz and Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre, had traveled to the Arctic to witness NATO's massive cold response military exercise. This is not a small event. Over 32,000 troops from 14 countries were conducting war games in the frozen wilderness of northern Norway, practicing how NATO would respond to a Russian attack on Allied territory. Canadian Special Forces were operating deep behind mock enemy lines. German mountain infantry were demonstrating Leopard tanks, snowmobiles, armored vehicles, and drones. It was one of the largest displays of Allied military readiness in years, and all 3 leaders had arrived on an armored personnel carrier to watch it firsthand. And then the news broke about the sanctions waiver, standing together at a joint press conference on that frozen military base with NATO exercises literally happening in the background. All 3 leaders publicly broke with Washington. But it was Carney who delivered the sharpest response. He stated flatly that Canada's position is to maintain sanctions on Russia, including on the shadow fleet that is moving this oil. He then drew a direct line between Russia and the broader conflict, pointing out the tight cooperation between Russia and Iran, saying it has come at great cost to the people of Ukraine and represents a great threat to peace and security in Europe. And then came the line that made headlines around the world. When asked if G7 countries or NATO would lobby President Trump to reverse the decision, Carney looked straight at the cameras and said that they all have direct lines to the president, and they will use them. Let me tell you why that matters so much. This was not some carefully worded diplomatic hedge. This was the leader of America's closest ally, standing on a NATO base surrounded by Allied troops, publicly saying he was going to call the President of the United States and tell him he made a mistake. In the world of international diplomacy, that is about as confrontational as it gets, without actually declaring a formal dispute. Norwegian Prime Minister Støre was equally forceful. He stated clearly that there should be more pressure on Russia, not less, and that sanctions need to be consistent so that Russia feels the pressure and comes to the negotiation table to accept a ceasefire and a just and durable peace. This matters because Norway is not just any country in this equation. Norway is the largest supplier of natural gas to Europe. It is a major oil producer. And the return of Russian oil to global markets directly undermines Norway's competitive position. So when Støre says this is wrong, he's not just making a moral argument, and he's making an economic one too. Now let's talk about what Ukraine thinks about all of this, because their reaction was devastating. On the same day, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was in Paris, standing alongside French President Emmanuel Macron. Zelensky called the decision not very logical. He warned that lifting sanctions means Russia will receive more money and that money will fund more drone attacks, more weapons, more destruction. He estimated that just this single easing of sanctions could provide Russia with roughly $10 billion for its war effort. $10 billion. And here's the thing that makes this even more painful. There are credible reports reported by multiple major news organizations in the days before this decision that Russia has been providing intelligence to Iran, intelligence that could help Iranian forces target American troops in the Middle East. Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin, a former CIA and Pentagon official, said in a Senate hearing that if Russia is helping to kill U.S. forces, we have crossed a Rubicon and we need to take decisive action. And instead of decisive action against Russia, the Trump administration eased sanctions. Republican Senator Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, said he strongly disagrees with the decision. Republican Representative Don Bacon has also voiced criticism. This is not a partisan issue. Members of both parties are alarmed. Meanwhile, you know who was happy about this decision? The Kremlin. Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that they see the U.S. actions as an attempt to stabilize energy markets. And in this regard, their interests align. Let that sink in. The Kremlin is publicly saying that American and Russian interests are now aligned. The Wall Street Journal reported that Putin can barely conceal a smirk as the war in Iran continues to benefit Russia economically and geopolitically. And the Washington Post reported that Russia is reveling in the decision, hoping it will lead to further and more permanent sanctions relief. But the story didn't stop there. Over the weekend, the situation escalated even further. On Sunday, March 15th, which is today, Carney gathered with the leaders of 5 Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland, for a historic mini-summit in Oslo. The purpose of that summit was to discuss strengthening defense capabilities in the face of what they described as higher international tensions, including not just Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, but also the Trump administration's repeated threats to take over Greenland. At that summit, Carney was asked directly by Danish media whether Canada would commit troops to defend Greenland against threats of U.S. annexation. His answer was remarkable. He said that Canada stands behind the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, that it is for the people of Greenland and Denmark to decide their futures, and that Canada will back that with measures as necessary. Norwegian Prime Minister Støre added that the 6 Nordic nations plus Canada are not weak countries, that they are strong countries in terms of their values and their determination. If you're finding this as important as I think it is, please take 1 second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need to see it, and that's what matters right now. So let's pull all of this together and talk about what it means for America and for all of us. What we are witnessing right now is something that foreign policy experts are calling a rupture in the Western alliance. When Carney spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos earlier this year, he used that exact word, rupture, not transition. He said the old order is not coming back and that nostalgia is not a strategy. He said great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, and he wasn't talking about Russia or China. He was talking about the United States. David Sachs, a China specialist at the Council on Foreign Relations, said that Beijing cannot believe its luck, that Trump is doing China's work for it. Prime ministers from Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Ireland, South Korea, Finland, and Germany have all visited Beijing in recent months, something that would have been nearly unthinkable just 2 years ago. Morten Andersen, an international relations expert at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, confirmed that Norway views the situation along Carney's line, seeing the United States increasingly as an unpredictable partner rather than a reliable ally. And here's the economic reality that ties all of this together. Before the Iran war began, the sanctions were actually working. Russia's Urals crude blend had fallen below $40 a barrel in December 2025, some $25 below the Brent benchmark. Russia was losing money. Putin was being forced to borrow from banks and raise taxes. Oil and gas revenues had been squeezed to a fraction of what Moscow needed to fund both its domestic programs and its war machine, the sanctions regime that the United States built and its allies maintained was genuinely putting Russia in a financial vice. And then the Iran war changed everything. Global oil prices surged. Russian crude, even with sanctions, started trading above $80 a barrel. And now, with the 30-day waiver, 128 million barrels of Russian oil can flow freely to buyers worldwide, generating billions of dollars that will go directly into the Russian treasury and from there into the production of weapons, drones, missiles, and everything else Russia is using to wage war on Ukraine and potentially to help Iran target American service members. The International Energy Agency's 32 member countries unanimously agreed to release 400 million barrels of oil from emergency reserves to try to bring prices down. The U.S. alone is releasing 172 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But analysts say it's not enough to offset the disruption, and lifting Russian sanctions is unlikely to meaningfully lower prices at the pump for American consumers either. What it will do is pad Russia's bank account. Let me give you the bigger picture here, the part that keeps foreign policy analysts up at night. For 80 years, since the end of World War II, the United States has been the cornerstone of a global alliance system. NATO, the G7, the United Nations, the Bretton Woods financial institutions, all of these were built on the idea that America would lead and that its allies could trust it. That trust is what allowed the United States to project power far beyond its borders without having to use military force every single time. Allies followed America's lead on sanctions, on trade, on security, because they believed that America's word was good and that the system benefited everyone. What we are watching right now is that trust being tested in ways it has never been tested before. When 6 out of 7 G7 nations say don't ease sanctions on Russia, and the 7th does it anyway, that's not just a policy disagreement. That's a signal to every ally around the world that Washington will act unilaterally regardless of what anyone else thinks. When the leader of Canada says he's going to pick up the phone and tell the president he's wrong, and when 5 Nordic nations gather for a summit specifically because they're worried about American unpredictability, that's a fundamental realignment of global relationships. And for those of us here at home, the implications are deeply personal. Higher oil prices mean higher gas prices, higher food prices, higher costs for everything that gets shipped across this country. The weakening of alliances means less burden sharing on defense, which means either higher military spending or reduced security. And the perception that America is willing to help Russia profit from a war that has devastated millions of people, that perception damages something that is very hard to rebuild once it's lost, and that is America's moral authority. So what happens next? The 30-day waiver expires on April 11th. But Treasury Secretary Bessent has already hinted that broader relaxation of Russian energy sanctions could be coming. Trump himself told a House Republican conference that they're waiving certain oil-related sanctions to reduce prices and that maybe they won't have to put them back on because there will be so much peace. Meanwhile, Carney and the European leaders have made it clear they will not follow suit. Canada just rolled out new sanctions on 100 additional vessels in Russia's shadow fleet. France, Germany, and Sweden have sent troops to Greenland. The Nordic countries are deepening defense cooperation. The European Council president called the U.S. decision very concerning and said weakening sanctions increases Russian resources to wage war. And Congress is not staying quiet either. Members from both parties are pushing back, with some Republican senators calling the move a serious mistake. This is one of those moments where the decisions being made right now, this week, this month, will shape the world for decades to come. Whether Russia is held accountable for its actions, whether American alliances survive, whether the rules-based international order that has kept the peace for 8 decades continues to function, all of that is on the table right now. And that is why I'm telling you this story, all of it, with every verified detail I can find, because you deserve to know what is happening in your name with your government on the world stage. If you learned something from this video, if you believe that more Americans need to understand what's going on, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to see it. I'll be covering every development as it happens. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.